The Chester County Historic Preservation Network welcomes you to the holiday edition of our virtual heritage series Live at 5 on the third Thursday of each month through the end of 2021. In tonight's program, we travel to Chadds Ford in Chester County to experience Christmas at the Barns-Brinton house. Please welcome Randall Spackman and members of the Chadds Ford Historical Society who will present tonight's program.
Hello, everybody. I want to thank you guys for joining us in the year of 2020. Of course, after a major snowfall, we're broadcasting from the 1714 Barns-Brinton Tavern. I'm the president of the Chadds Ford Historical Society. I have with me Sandy Johnson, head of our events. We have Lynn King playing the dulcimer later today and also telling us about some amazing Christmas music. And we have Ken Lawson, vice president of the board, and also that guy who can actually make all this technology work from a 300-year-old tavern. So he's the most important man in the room. I assure you of that. But I want to thank everybody for joining us from hopefully the comfort of your nice living room and all that. Chadds Ford Historical Society has been around for over 50 years. It has the Barns-Brinton Tavern, which we are right now, Barns-Brinton House. We also have the John Chad House, also the schoolhouse across the street, and the Barnes Visitor Center. We do the Great Pumpkin Carve, Chadds Ford Days. This year, we're also doing the virtual gingerbread gingerbread house, not carve this year. And some amazing events. We also have a great exhibit forming about loom and textiles coming in the spring, and a lot of other amazing things. So what we're going to do tonight is tell you about some of the amazing history of the Barns-Brinton house, how it came to be from where actually when the society inherited back in 1969, and some of the different history about the music, the food, all the different things that we know nowadays, and actually how some of these different things got started. So what I'd like to do is I'll have Ken take you for a little tour through the other room. And we're actually in the tavern side of the tavern right now. He's actually going to take the camera, we're actually going to go mobile through the family side. And the family side is where the Barnes family would have lived at the time, and that was their side. The house is actually a divided house, so each side's almost a mirror image of the other one. And Sandy, they had the Barnes husband and wife, and they had how many kids?
5 children. They had 4 sons and a daughter, and they were all under the age of 21 when Mr. Barnes passed away.
So you had 5 children and the parents living in this side right here, and the bedroom upstairs. So I know that's close quarters even by modern standards. I couldn't imagine how good sports they were back then. But you can see some of the different woodwork, the working crane, the hearth over there, all the different points that really restored this property back. And that's something where it's so important to actually come see these properties in person. We actually can show you, virtually where we are now and how the house looks, but to see it in person, you can really appreciate it. And that's what some of these slides will be showing in just a second. Will actually show how this house became where it is now. Because not every relic and historic structure starts out like this. People will see these amazing buildings and assume they're always that way, and they're not. So we're going to do a couple of different things. I myself, which we're actually going to talk about later, I'm actually in a British uniform. And Sandy, you're in what period clothing?
18th century.
18th century, okay. Yes. And then Lynn, you are wearing?
The 18th century clothing also.
Oh, 18th century clothing. So we have all different things going on here at the house tonight. So Kathleen, if you could start the PowerPoint, we'll show you actually some of the history of how the house began and some of the early photos that shows actually how the area has changed. When the society acquired the house in what, 1969?
Yeah.
So Chadds Ford Historical Society is over 50 years old. Of course, we have the John Chad House and the Barns-Brinton Tavern, which at that time was in Kennett Township, but now it's in Chadds Ford Township, Pennsylvania. Next. Here's a picture of the outside of the house as it stands today. Sandy, tell us a little bit about the Great Road. Why would they need a tavern in this area?
So there were taverns built in many places because travelers obviously had to spend the night somewhere. And so there were certain rules and regulations. If you did run a tavern, Mr. Barnes would have to petition to run the tavern. It had to meet certain standards. And then he would be granted the petition, and then he would dispense the alcohol in the bar that we have in this building. Although this is a reproduction, the bar here.
Next. So here's a picture which is actually really interesting compared to what we see nowadays. It shows Route 1 on the actual front of the house, which is Route 1 got moved later on in that, 1938 to the other side of the house.
Where it stands now.
And it shows, it was actually a fairly good cartway, it shows the wall and the front porch and all.
Yeah, that's 19th century.
And then here we have the front porch, we have a wooden fence and all. And then one of the things that was pointed out to me is the windows. The double hung windows?
Right, this house, the Barns-Brinton house was not originally built this way. That front porch is not original because you can see the flashing, as they call it, those courses of brick that go all along that house wall in the front. And the double hung windows are also, they removed the original casement windows and put in these double hungs. But the way the house stands now is the way it was originally built when William Barnes built it around 1714.
Next. So here it is before the society acquired it. You can see it was started getting some porous shape. And the windows were boarded up, different things, and it wasn't looking as grand as it is nowadays. Next. So one interesting point is, and I learned that this was only, even though it was built as a tavern, it was only a tavern for what, a few years, Sandy?
Yes, what happened was William Barnes petitioned the court. The oldest tavern petition that I can find is 1722. And he petitions the court to run a tavern, and he runs it till 1726, where he's then arrested for keeping a disorderly house. And there were a lot of Quakers in the area, so God knows what went on. So he's arrested. There's actually a fine out for him, sheriff. It got pretty ugly, and eventually he straightened himself out. And by 1728, 29, 30, and 31, he petitions the court over and over again to run this building as a tavern. And they don't allow him. And by 1731, he's dead. So he dies. He's heavily in debt, over 100 people he owes money to. His wife is illiterate. He's got 5 children under the age of 21, so it's not a pretty picture. James Few is the largest creditor, and he then takes over the house. He tries to run it as a tavern in 32, 33, I believe in 34, they won't allow it. By 1742, he then sells the house to Isaac Taylor and buys it back in a deed release so that he can now own it and run it himself, which still doesn't happen. And so by 1753, he sells 255 acres to the Brinton family, his parcel plus the 104 acres that William Barnes had that Few had obtained. So this house is then in the Brinton family, a Quaker family, till 1859, 106 years.
106 years of one family living in a house. That's almost got to be a local record. That's pretty impressive.
And the sad thing is he built this grand building as a tavern, and it literally only was a tavern for 4 years.
Wow. Next. So here's actually another shot of the outside. You actually can see the telegraph wires here, how things have advanced. You actually can see a car, and there actually was paved the Route 1 before they flipped it to the other side. It shows it was actually pretty advanced right there. Next. So here's the saving of the home. So here's the home when it was obtained by the society, and it just goes to show at that time it was an old house. It really had some neat history, but its future was unknown. Next. So here's some of the documentation. Trying to get the house ready for what? The National Historic Register?
The National Register of Historic Places.
That's an amazing documentation to be able to have in the home. And it can show, of course, document the photos and the way it was presented at the time. Next. Now this goes to really show the picture on the left, how the house was when they found it. You could see there was what? The molding was in poor shape, the floors, the roof leaked, you'll see damage, you'll see paint all over the woodwork. The picture on the right shows the finished, restored family side. And it really just goes to show through painstaking restoration, careful research, you really can bring something back from the past.
And that molding on the right is called Belection molding.
That's right.
In the 18th century, they had catalogs where people would purchase them and learn how to make the molding. And some people have come to reproduce that molding because it's so beautiful.
It's great now. So here's a picture of what this was, the master bedroom?
Yes.
On the family side.
Yes.
And you can see the water damage, the paint on the woodwork, all those different things. There's a drawing of the house layout there, how simple it is. And so this is where the Barnes family, husband, wife, and 5 kids would have slept.
Yes, 7 people in that room, yes. And there were multiple locks on the door on the right, probably because he wanted to keep God knows who out of his bedroom in the evenings. So,
Well, travelers right across the hall,
right.
so.
Well, downstairs, but yeah.
Next. So this is a closer up picture of this, the water damage, the front of the fireplace damage, all those different things, you know, that unless you really had a vision for what could be, it would be tough to see that. Next. So here's some of the exterior shots. You can see the house was overgrown. You can see some of the other side. The picture to the right is actually flipped, but that's where we are in the tavern side in front of the fireplace. Next. And here is some of the restored, like I said, the family side and the front door, which is what is original to the house.
Yes.
Okay. Next. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Now this is what actually the photos I like the best, because it shows on the left the room that we're in now. So you can see what it looks like now and what it looked like back when the house was obtained. And what catches my eye is how the fireplace is so much smaller. What did they do there, Sandy?
Yeah, they just blocked it up and made it so much smaller. I don't know why, but on the left-hand side, well, on the right-hand side picture where the window is, that's the ingle nook. And the ingle nook today, the green shelf, that bottom shelf with the green paint is said to be original. And we also have another shelf in his office on the family side. There was a so-called office, and that has that same green paint. So, yeah, they cut, and they also put wood stoves in. So they modified it so much over 300 years.
Oh, it would, but it's amazing how it can be brought back.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I find that we learned is the actual mantle wasn't there, but we found the echo, in the plaster?
Yeah, when they build these houses, first they install the woodwork and then they plaster around them. So you can see the profile of the mantle in the plaster. And so they use that to then rebuild a new mantle.
Next. So here's one of the upstairs. This is what the traveler's bedroom.
Yes, I believe, yes.
Okay, so that shows some of the missing slats, some of the paint, some of the damage to the fireplace itself, how the wall was found. And then tell me how they found that the wall where should have gone.
So the partitions have been removed in this picture. What happens is when the Brinton family's living here, they punched a doorway through the wall in the upstairs so you could go from one bedroom to the other. Obviously, when travelers lived in that bedroom, you didn't want them to be able to access your bedroom. So they moved around partitions. And what happens is in the 18th century, when the floors are wood, they clean it with water and the water gets underneath the walls and it rots the walls. And so it leaves this telltale sign of where there were walls. And so it's missing in the picture on the left, but our house now has those partitions put back. In one of the accounts, it talks about furniture in the little bedroom, and it's indicating one of those rooms up there. But now it's a large traveler's room because that's the way Barnes had built it. It's the same way we know that the bar that's not original, this is a copy of a bar that was built in, that was in Tennessee. And they put this bar in 1980, but there were wear patterns on the floor, and I believe in the ceiling, where they could see where the original bar was. So they believe it's called a cage bar because it's got bars on it.
Next. And then this actually shows a dramatic change in the family side. You can see the hole where the stovepipe went through as it was modified. And so of course, just the change in the quality of the woodwork and how it was restored on the right, it's just phenomenal. Next. So this is actually upstairs in the traveler's bedroom, and this actually shows the different layers of the wall and a modern patch with what kind of mortar is in there or plaster?
Yeah, and there's horsehair in that because that's what they used back then. He was a blacksmith by trade. He may have made the nails that are actually in those slats. And so we preserved it so that people could learn from that and see what the walls actually look like.
Next. Now, one of the reasons why I'm wearing a British uniform is to try to support aid and all to the Barclay River campaign in 1976 that shows the Hessian that marched past the house down to the Battle of Brandywine, Chadds Ford. And of course, the Hessians helped the Crown forces against General Washington, Marquis de Lafayette at the Battle of Brandywine. What else happened here at the house?
It's not given the recognition because it only shows the Hessians marching past the house, but we've come to discover in the recent past that thousands of British troops had skirmishes and small battles all around this area that went on all day, or I don't know if it was the number, just the one day, but there was more that went on than just them marching past this house. So this house is really significant with the Battle of the Brandywine, just as our other house, the John Chad's house.
Next. And here's actually a really neat tidbit about, of course, a local favorite, Andrew Wyeth, which shows the house there. And what's interesting, how art captured a bit of history. It also shows what, the porch there, or the shed there on the back side?
Right. And the road, the modern road would be on the right-hand side. So that's Tenant Farmer that Wyeth had painted. And then in 1970, the River Museum began, and I was told, if this is correct, that the molding and the woodwork above me on this hearth was taken away because they were working on this house. They brought it to the River Museum and made a mock-up so that when they opened the River Museum, this was part of it because Wyeth had painted, this famous painting of the Barns-Brinton house. And then they brought it back and, replaced it.
Now, one little thing, I'll give you guys a little tidbit, secret, and I'd like to actually hear your guys' thoughts. And see that tree on the left that's in that painting? All right, that's important. So remember that tree. All right, next. All right, see that tree there? Sandy and I have a discussion if that's the same tree or not in the two different paintings. But once again, art has captured the house from the same similar perspective. And that's one reason why we, of course, can document history, obviously through an artist's eye, but just to show the recognition the house does receive through art and paintings and things like that, which is so impressive in the area. Next. So restoring a house like this, obviously the house, obviously in the photo, we just got a new roof put on the house. I want to thank all the local supporters in the community, all that helped with that, because without community and our tremendous supporters, the Chatsworth Ford Historical Society and similar institutions like us would not be able to afford these hundreds and hundreds of year-old houses and the different education, different programs that we do. And we just got a new roof put on the house. One of the things to do is obviously when everybody's looking for these gems to save them, is of course you have to acquire the item and you have to research it. You just can't go to Home Depot or things like that, or any old architect. You have to go to somebody that really understands history and the restoration and will actually do the legwork to find the marks on the floor, to find the marks in the plaster, to do, crawl through the attic and crawl through the basement, all those kind of things, to find those hints, to really see where we were, especially because the windows are not original. And we're going to talk about that too, and how we learned about that. Cindy has a great tidbit about that. So the research, of course, you have to document it. Just like before, all the photos we got back in the 1960s of when the house was acquired, you got documented before you start, during, and after, because we're all creating part of that legacy and that stewardship of the history of the home that we're trying to work on. And of course, then you actually have to go through the actual legwork of restoring it. And this can be a very long, arduous product, but obviously you can see the results. In this house, the John Chad house, the Spring house, all the different things that we have here, that same diligence was put into all of them. And of course, then we have to maintain them. Trying to fix a broken window here at the house is very difficult. Trying to get a new roof, trying to get woodwork, all the different maintenance, because it's almost takes more work to keep it the same than just to put another coat of paint on something. We want to really do it the right way. Next. So here's the outside of the home against Route 1. It shows how they're buttressing the outside foundation, they're scaffolding the house. And Cindy, what's the big hole there next to the foundation?
So John Milner, the architect, was instrumental on helping to restore these homes. And he told me that they had to put all crushed stone in that gully there because we're so close to Route 1, the vibration of the trucks going by would just cause so much damage to the house. So that's part of the restoration process that would not have normally had to have happened, but because the road is only maybe 5 feet from the house and the one corner, we just had that repointed because we have constant salt trucks throwing salt on that, which destroys the mortar. Even today, we couldn't get into the house because the lock was frozen, because the door was frozen, because it's completely covered in snow and salt from the plows. So there's always abuse to the house.
We actually lived it today by
Yes.
literally cutting the edge of the doorway with a key to try
Well,
to
not the
open it
door,
up.
just
The snow, the ice, to try to get that opened up. Literally, the plow had thrown all the debris over the guardrail onto the house. So it really just goes to show how sometimes modern day things and the old don't always work that well together. But it's amazing the details. So even under the ground, so much work was done that you don't even ever see and appreciate. But that's something you have to get into the bones of the item to really make her last a long time in the modern world. Next. So this shows what, like a plastic tarp on the roof. It was nailed down. This is when they first acquired the house. And what's interesting about these photos is what that lower left corner, Sandy, shows what plaster on the wall.
Yeah, there was an outbuilding that we couldn't reproduce because it's so close to the road. And to our right is a door, and we believe the oven is out there under Route 1 most likely. So this, I don't know when this picture was taken, but I'm guessing it's around 1970 when they're restoring the building.
It just goes to shame that it's the same in the oven, the outhouse, perhaps the barn, all that's under Route 1, the blacksmith shop, all that is history is gone and on. It's sad it could have been saved back in the 30s when they put Route 1 in, but at least we were able to preserve what we have now. Next. So here's one of the documentational photographs and a drawing of the house, and it shows what the outside of one of the Inglenook windows there for the fireplace.
Yes, it does on the bottom right.
Next. And of course, there's your marker.
Yeah. That was for the 300th birthday.
300th birthday. And then, of course, we have a picture of the front door without snow and ice on it. So it's from warmer days. Next. Now, this is has some great, interesting points, Sandy. So what's the brickwork around the windows there that's shown in those photos?
I can't see it that well, but I'm guessing it's Flemish bond brickwork on the house, which is the end of the brick. The end of the bricks are black. They weren't painted black. They were just fired so close to the fire that they're the hardest bricks and they turn black. They're the headers that are on the house. And then the stretchers are the sideways red colored bricks that were second closest to the fire. The bricks that are salmon colored that were fired furthest are softest, and they're in the walls. And then on either side of the doorways and the windows and the ends of the building are called closer bricks, and they're half the size of a header. And they define those openings so you know that they are the original openings. And also one of our windows has a stiffener rod that was, holes from a stiffener rod. The stiffener rods were put into casement windows only, and they prevented the glass from bending because it's held together with lead during storms and wind. And the office closet it's an office or a closet, had a portion of the original woodwork. And John Milner told me that the stiffener rod evidence was there, and that was another reason why he knew that they were casement windows. There was also other information that he gathered to figure that out.
But it's just going to show from a little closet window that had what, one little section left or something like that?
Well, three, the top
three
portion,
sides.
yes.
They were to figure out all the other windows from that. And of course, you see the front door latch. That's original. We think that could have been made by Mr. Barnes, perhaps,
Maybe.
because he was a blacksmith by trade, obviously at the time. And of course, the steps and all that were put in at that time. Next. So this is the great thing is to have these homes. We want people to come out, enjoy them, see them, appreciate them. Obviously, you guys are all invited to come out when the house is reopened in the spring and the summer. And of course, we do some tours by appointment and things like that. But of course, to educate, inspire, we want the next generations to appreciate what happened days gone by, and exactly what this history teaches us and about the buildings, what's happening in these scenes.
So this is a junior guide program that we used to have, and hopefully we'll bring it back. And it was youth from 11 to 18, and they would make colonial garb, they would wear it, they would live history. And so in these pictures, I don't know if they may be dyeing something on the left and then they're cooking on the right. So it was a wonderful program, and it does help keep history alive.
Next.
And once again, here are other photos on the bottom right, or the bottom middle is dancing, because that was one of the events that they had. And then the youth are in the upper left-hand corner. That it's the junior guide program.
Next. So, all right, well, it just goes to show how much history is in this house and even to be able to maintain that kind of history. So, Sandy, you've done some research to be able to help us out now for this time of year, obviously with the Christmas festivities and all. And I've learned that there's a lot more to Christmas than what I thought with the 8 tiny reindeer and all that other things going on. So, all right, so enlighten us a little bit of what you found.
So in my research, if we go back before the birth of Jesus, the pagans worshipped, they worshipped different gods. And one of the gods was Saturn, which was the god of agriculture. And so they had a festival that was on December 17th called Saturnalia. And they worshipped, for this festival, it was close to the winter solstice, where after the December 21st, the days were going to get longer. And they brought evergreens, and that's where we get the mistletoe and the fir and the holly, the Christmas tree. They were all pagan symbols. And so what happened was, then we have the birth of baby Jesus, and Christianity is born, and they obviously want more people to become Christians. So in the 4th century, Pope Julius, he decides that he's going to choose December 25th as Jesus's birthday. Now, there's no date in the Bible as to when his birthday was. And so he uses that, and it's from December 25th. Well, the pagans celebrated from the 17th to the 23rd. They extended their holiday. So now the Christians are going to do the same thing. So it's December 25th, and it's going to go to the Epiphany, which is January 5th or 6th, depending on what you read. And this is the day that the wise men come to see baby Jesus. So during these 12 days, it's called 12th night. And we don't really celebrate this now, but back then they did. And so the Christians are trying to spread this word. And by the 6th century in England, Christianity had really taken over in England. And then in the 8th century, it moves to Scandinavia. And by the Middle Ages, Christianity has now overtaken the pagan holiday. But not everybody was on board with it. The Puritans didn't agree. They obviously don't agree with a date that some man makes up, that, they believe the spirit of God was in everyone, and we don't need to celebrate that way. In Oliver Cromwell in the 17th century tried to ban Christmas in England, but then Charles II came into power again in 1660, and he brought Christmas back. So that was short-lived. So anyway, there were other people that did not agree with the holiday, but the Pilgrims did not celebrate it in Boston. If in the 17th century, if you were caught celebrating it in any way, you were fined 5 shillings. You were allowed to go to church, but that was it. You weren't allowed to do the other things. And the reason, but the weird thing is, in Jamestown, they celebrated it and it was fine. So it wasn't consistent. But the other reason why they didn't like it was 12 days of debauchery. I mean, it was just celebrations that didn't really line up in any way to church or anything like that. So the rich would have had really fancy feasts and hunts and music and dancing and drinking, and it was craziness. If you were a commoner, you were out on the town creating unrest and mayhem, and in the taverns, it was complete chaos. And at the end, we're going to show you a picture of what it looked like.
Maybe that was part of Barnes' downfall with his unorderly house.
Could have been.
That's where it began, around Christmas time.
And a fun thing that they did was they had a 12th night cake. And I don't know when this 12th night cake really started. And when you look in cookbooks, it doesn't actually call it. John Mallard, 1807, calls it a 12th night cake. But in a lot of cookbooks, it's just called a great cake. And I mean, it's a great cake. It's gigantic. So I have a 5-pound version of that cake. The original recipe is 20 pounds. And some of these cakes took multiple men to carry, and they would hide a bean or a pea or a coin or even a small baby Jesus in that cake. And obviously it had to be big because there's a lot of people wherever they were celebrating. They cut it all up, and whoever got the bean was king of the misrule or the queen of the pea. And they got to do crazy things and demand crazy things of their masters that normally would not be allowed, but it was allowed that one day. And it was really the culmination. The last day, the 12th night, was when it got really crazy, like the Mardi Gras, if I didn't say that. And so anyway, you can see why the Quakers did not agree with this. And but Washington, he wasn't a Quaker. Washington, I had read an account that on Christmas he went to service, but Christmas was not as big as it is now. But then on 12th night, he and his wife Martha were married in 1759. And every year they had huge lavish parties. So 12th night was actually more celebrated in some circles than the day of Christmas, the way we celebrate it now. The reason I bring up the Quakers is when William Barnes dies, James Few takes over the house. Long story short, in 1753, the Brinton family purchased this house and lived here 106 years until 1859. And our other property, Elizabeth Chadds, lives in that house nearly the whole 18th century. John dies in 60, she lives till 1790. And then that house is sold to the Brittons. So they, once again, Quakers. So the reason I'm saying that is for 150 to 200 years of the time that we've owned these homes, well, when we didn't own them, there was no celebration because the Quakers absolutely do not recognize Christmas at all. So nothing would have been done in this house. There would have been no decorations for all that time.
Wow.
So
That's pretty impressive. But one thing I know is if there's ever a Jeopardy question of Christmas and Sandy's on it, I'm putting my money on Sandy because I think she could nail it after that. That's impressive. So, and I'm just glad, and I don't know if everybody knows that we're gonna be emailing you a quiz after all this and we have to see how everybody does, you know? So, well, great. Well,
I have a little bit more
Oh, good.
about Christmas trees. So
Oh, yes.
So Christmas trees were a pagan symbol. So a lot of people weren't on board with that. And so, but the Germans were into their Christmas trees. And the earliest that we have an account of a Christmas tree is in a diary in Lancaster, probably a German person, in 1821. And in 1830 in York, Pennsylvania, that is the first account of a public viewing of a tree where they charged money, I believe, and people went to see it. Now, by the mid-18th century, Queen Victoria, her German-born husband, Prince Albert, decorated a tree, and it became more widespread, and England started to catch on to that belief. They also were instrumental in pushing the gingerbread and the Yule log. So some of these traditions that we have now were really started in the 19th century. But what happened was, also in the 19th century, there was, like I said, complete chaos, drinking, disorder. It wasn't really a holiday for children, not like it is now. And the gift giving and things were just not the same. So there were books written in the 19th century. One, it's not called 'Twas Night Before Christmas, but that's how everybody knows it. And it depicted this wholesome family life and how Christmas could be and the spirit of Christmas. And some believe that not 'Twas Night Before Christmas, but another book is what really brought about that change and how people perceive the holiday now. The poinsettia plant was brought in 1828 from Mexico, and then it was declared a federal holiday in 1870.
So the two takeaways I got is Christmas trees were in Lancaster and York. So go Pennsylvania for Christmas trees. I think that's a pretty cool thing.
Because the Germans, there were a lot of Germans in this area.
That's oh yeah, you make German influence and all that. So that's great. Well, with all Christmas celebrations and all, obviously there's always music and jollification, things like that. So Lynn King is actually going to tell us about her dulcimer and some of the different music and things like that from the era. Lynn, let's hear a few good things and tell us about what you're going to do.
Okay, what I'm gonna do is back to the Germans. They come to settle in Lancaster and they bring this instrument with them. This is called a scheitholt, which means stick of wood. When they moved from Lancaster County down to the Appalachian Mountains to find better farming area, they take it with them. Towards the middle to the end of the 1700s, the Scotch-Irish move in and figure it's not loud enough. So they put it on a box, they make it a little bit bigger, They're trying to get more volume out of it. Towards the end of the 1700s, you get a teardrop shape. And after 1800, you get this shape, which is the hourglass. The teardrop, the hourglass, and the rectangular shape are still used today. And I will play several Christmas carols. Two you will recognize, one you may not, but one comes from the 1500s. Bring It Forth to Ned Isabella is a traditional French carol. I will be also playing the Cherry Tree Carol. Nobody knows how old it is. It goes back in a lot of history.
Wow, very
Very
nice. That's beautiful. So Lynn, how old are some of those songs? We were talking that they even surprised me how old they are.
Okay, well, the King Wenceslas, 1582. Bring a torch to Notre Isabella. They have it as traditional French, which means it could go back to the 12th century.
Wow.
Some of your Christmas music, and some of the other music that I've come across with, is the music may be, say, 12th or 13th century. The words come in are modern. So a lot of times I will play the music, but I will not play the words.
Okay. But 1582 for the one.
For Good King Wenceslas.
See, I would have guessed 1583. That's pretty impressive. I had no idea some of the songs that we hear every day
Right.
have such a tremendous history, what, 500 years old?
And a lot of the music comes out of the Appalachian Mountains, the Celtic, the British, the Irish music. It's coming out of the Appalachian Mountains, and we, of a certain age, know most of it as folk music from the 60s, but it dates back farther. And what they were, a lot of them were stories. That was how you got your news. And if you may play the Cherry Tree Carol one way on the eastern side of the mountain, and maybe played a little differently on the western side of the mountain. Just depends on where you're from and who's singing it and who's passing it on to someone else.
So
And how you remember what was passed on to you.
that's pretty amazing. They all have their own nuance and things like that and all. They think on their own life.
Yep.
That's incredible. Well, thank you so much for. And I'm curious, how long does it take you to learn an instrument like that? Because I don't think there's local lessons or something
You're
like that.
pretty much self-taught.
Self-taught.
A
Okay.
lot of times you can get somebody to start you on it, but I play it in a traditional manner in that I'm noting it. I'm playing the melody line. There's a way to play it where you're playing a lot of chords, but traditionally, they only had frets under one string and the other strings were drums.
Okay.
So you're only playing the melody. Which
Interesting.
makes it very easy to do.
That's kind of cool. Yeah, because the only instrument I've ever been able to self-taught was air guitar. And I'm pretty good at air, self-taught air guitar. Beyond that, I would never, but it gives me the appreciation of what you learn with that and how amazing that is, that music. So, well, thank you so much for sharing with us and all of that. 'Cause it really, it adds to all the joyfulness and all the aspects of Christmas with the music, the history, and of course, Sandy's going to show us some of the different foods that she's been working on. Now, if you guys have noticed, Sandy has not stopped tending to this fire. She has not stopped cooking and cutting and baking and turning and all those different things, because back then, the entire meal preparation was every day, all day, even planning food for weeks ahead. One of the dishes, Sandy, you were telling me about is when you have to make something with sauerkraut, you have to start that how many months prior?
Like 6 months.
So 6 months prior, if you want sauerkraut, you have to start 6 months ago. So you really have to know your timing back then. So, all right, so show us some of the different things you have going on here, because this has been sheer torture looking at this. It is authentic, it is beautiful, some of the different attributes here.
Thank you. So there's 4 items in front of us, actually 5, but 2 are similar, that would have been served for 12th night, the feast. Obviously, if you were wealthy, you might have eaten these more often, but the ingredients that are in them are repeated a lot, and they were expensive. They had to be imported. They had to be processed a certain way by the baker or the chef or whatever. So it took a lot of time. And so if you were not of means, you wouldn't be doing this. But anyway, so over here we have lemon and orange peel, and lemons and oranges by the 19th century were in this country, but the Spanish brought them over. They brought the seeds over. Originally, the lemons were here, but then the oranges were a little bit later. But to get them to be candied, it took a week. So I had to soak them for 6 days in salt water. Then you have to boil them in water, and then boil them in a light sugar bath, and then a heavier sugar syrup, and then coat them in sugar and then let them dry. So that took a week, obviously not all week, but I mean, just to get these candied lemons and oranges.
For one ingredient.
Right,
the whole
for
thing.
one
Wow.
ingredient. And then you had currants and raisins, which were very popular. Actually, currants were used more because currants were Zante currants or Corinthian grapes, which are seedless. And it's much easier to use a seedless grape because a lot of the recipes will say for like raisin pie, it will say stone, a quart of raisins. Well, that takes a long time to take the pits out of all this. So if you have a product like a currant, which tastes the same, that doesn't have pits, it's a lot easier. So that's in these items. And then you have your spices, which we have ginger, we have nutmeg, which is the center of the nut, and you'd have to grind it. Obviously not drop it, but you'd have to grind it on a device like this and then empty the grounds into this container. And this recipe, the gingerbread, I believe, says to use 1 whole nutmeg. And so it's not a teaspoon, you actually have to grind it because you don't really know exactly what you're gonna get. And these were imported from the East Indies. So is the cinnamon, which is a bark, and that could be ground up in this mortar and pestle, and you would grind it, or you could, I'd use this to grind it. I don't know whether that matters. And then the other, I skipped ahead, but these are the center, the nutmeg. This is mace. Mace is the fiber that's wrapped around the nut.
See, I never knew they were the same thing. I always thought they were different spices. I didn't know
They are though. They're
different
from,
spices, but I thought they were completely different plants.
oh, right. No, they're from the same. This is a little spicier, the mace, than the nutmeg. And some recipes tell you to put it in milk and then you get the flavorings when you heat the milk up. Others you can grind it. So I have some mace in here that I'm grinding with my mortar and pestle. And then we have sugar. Sugar was grown in Barbados, and then it had to go back to Europe to be processed, and then it was shipped here. So it's this triangular trade. And then it was wrapped in this nice blue paper that they would use to dye clothing with. And sugar came in a loaf. Some call it a cone, but it's a loaf. And you would use sugar nippers where you would nip off the sugar and you would grind it up in the mortar and pestle if you wanted it more fine. And then you would use it that way. So a lot of the recipes tell you to make sure you have all your ingredients out before you even begin. I wonder how many cooks actually went to make something and realized I don't even have the candied orange I need.
I've done that with the simple stuff.
So anyway, that is something that took place. I have here a Jack and a Jill, and Jack and Jill weren't people, they're units of measure. A Jill's a half a cup, a Jack is half of that. You can Google it. There's a large array of variations as to the origins of that, but a lot of the recipes do call for a Jill of cream or a Jill of sack. Sack was modern day sherry, and that's what I just poured over this pudding. So this is pudding, boiled pudding, plum pudding in the 18th century. And this is also boiled pudding made by our friend Cheryl Trozzi. She did a wonderful job. And what happens is if you were wealthy, you could have a fancy mold like this and you put your batter in here. And if you're really good like Cheryl, she was able to get it out perfectly.
I mean, that's astounding, the form and everything like that.
So she boiled that pudding in this container and I added powdered sugar to it. I boiled this pudding, same recipe, in this cloth in the pot over here. So if you were poor and you didn't have access to this beautiful tin mold, you would then boil it in a piece of linen. Now, the original recipe was a 4-hour boil. I cut the recipe in half to a 2-hour boil, and they called it plum, but it wasn't necessarily plum. It was dried raisins or currants. A lot of the recipes call it plum, but there's no plum in the recipe, even though there are some that do. And then we have mince pie. Well, these are mince tarts that Cheryl made. Once again, it has the dried fruit in there and all these spices. They made mince pie with actual meat, animal meat, in the 17th century. And then by the 18th century, they started to remove the meat and add more fruit. So these are all fruit. By the 18th and 19th century, people liked the fruit more. Here we have gingerbread. Gingerbread, like I said, goes back actually 2400 BC. Greece is where they first sold gingerbread. But it was ginger with sugar, like that medicinal way that they used to eat it. And then it morphs over thousands of years and becomes this. But the funny thing is, they've never actually made bread with ginger. It's not gingerbread, even though it's called that, you know. And then lastly, we have the 12th night cake. And the 12th night cake, as I had mentioned, was maybe a 20, 30 pound cake. This one weighs 5 pounds. It's really dense. There's no chemical leavening in it. So there's no baking soda, there's no baking powder. So I had to separate the whites and the yolks and mix them by hand for almost an hour each.
Wow.
And then you have to fold in these ingredients and sprinkle in the flour and then add all your sweetmeats. They called them sweetmeats when they were fruits. And the brandy that goes in there. Now in this, like I said, could be a bean or a pea or a coin. I have a silver dollar in this one that we're going to cut it open. Whoever would get that would be the king of misrule and get to have fun. So
we're taking our odds on who gets that one tonight, right?
So I believe I explained all of this. I want Ken to go over to that wall over there and put the camera on a photo. It's not a photo, it's a painting in Prada, in Madrid. And it shows what 12th night celebrations actually look like in the 17th century, I believe is what that painting is. So you can see all the craziness. The king of misrule is on the right. He's got his crown on his head. And then on the left is some guy with, I don't know what he's got in his hand, but he's got, I think, a jester hat on. I'm not looking at the painting right now, but it looked like a lot of fun. But now you can see why, when you look at this painting, how this event was not really for young people and it wasn't a family-oriented affair, and how we morphed into something else.
It really did change. No, it looks astounding. And like I said, and I was joking, but the amount of time it takes to do something like this is phenomenal. It's truly an all-day job and things like that. It just occurred to me, if you had something with a grape that had seed in it, you had to remove all those seeds and things like that. It just made me think that sometimes how names and sayings come to be, it's the pits. I
never thought of that.
It must be, it's the pits. I mean, if that's a lot of work, if you have to stone, get all those pits out, if you want something like that, that's a lot of work. So I don't know, we'll have to look that up and find out. One thing we'll mention, and we'll mention later, is the Chesworth Historical Site. We're going to actually have some of these recipes on our website. Yes. So if somebody really wants to try this, you can, the recipes will be there.
And remember, a Jill is a half a cup if it says that.
Because they're authentic recipes. It will tell you exactly the way it was back then. So, okay, Sandy, show us what you want to do, a cut of the cake or so, and then. All right.
It's really, really dense. Oh my gosh. And there's also almonds in here.
I keep listening for the clank of that silver dollar. It's a real silver dollar, too.
Yes, yes.
So we do everything authentic around here. There's no.
Well, I didn't put a bean. And then I had read, that's what I'm hitting. I'm hitting the coin. That's why. And in one article that I read, they stopped using the bean because the drunken patrons were then choking to death on these beans.
Well, that's not the winning piece then.
Here's how the cake looks.
Oh, yeah, look at that, Ken.
And you can see the orange and the lemon and the currants and raisins, and there's almonds and brandy. It's actually a really, really tasty cake.
Now I'm going to show it to this camera too, right here. Everybody can see how that is just all layered through there. It's just all mixed up, all the different pieces in there.
The coin is right in here. I didn't get to it, but you hear me hitting it. There's the coin. So there it is in there. So what would happen is, though, they would cut up the entire cake, which I'm not going to do right now, but that's why someone would get that coin or that bean and be the king. So
that's amazing. Well, it just goes to show, for any kind of holiday celebration, including nowadays, it is a tremendous amount of work.
Yeah.
I mean, from cooking to this and that, it's And I like the idea of being 12 days long because you can really
Right.
enjoy yourself and have a lot more fun and all that. So, well, I'd like to thank everybody. And if there's any questions or so, we can help and see if we know the answer or so.
So
And also
this
remember,
is-
we have summer camps coming up and different events this fall. So keep checking the Chatsworth Historical website for more information as well.
Thank you. This is Tim Caban from the CCHPN. What a wonderful and just timely presentation during Christmas time here, and what a just a tremendous effort you put in. I'm going to read the questions, and right now I see I have a comment here, less than a question from earlier on, which says, "I wanted to point out, not too late, I know, that the Great Road to Nottingham, or the Great Post Road, so named because it was part of a measured route from Boston to Savannah. The more formal sounding name, the Great Road to Nottingham, called the Nottingham Road in this book, is a nod to its origin in northeastern Maryland, where the Nottingham family owned large tracts of land in northeastern Maryland."
That's a good point. Good comment.
Okay.
That's wonderful. That's good
Yeah, it's
information.
Good information.
I love that.
Why don't they send it to us in an email?
Yeah, you can send that to us and we can add that to our different information. That's great. See, it's all a community.
I absolutely will. And I have just a couple of questions. I was interested about the two things. One is the bar that I think you said was designed in Tennessee or copied from Tennessee. Is that right?
Yes, it was a copy from one found in Tennessee that was of the same kind of era or design, and they replicated it here because it fit the footprint.
It's called a cage bar because it actually looks like a cage and it's got bars on it. That's how, and the bar is open and it's literally.
Can you spin to the bar?
Okay.
Yeah, they'll show you that.
But
So
is
there's
that
a picture of the bar right next to it, and see this front, the gate closes, so he can lock that off, so you can't get into it without having the key to the little side door.
Only the tavern petition, only the person that held the petition could dispense the alcohol.
okay? My question is, I guess I might have somewhat of a Pennsylvania-centric attitude that cultural knowledge and information kind of moved from north to south. But it's interesting that a Tennessee design would be appropriate in the Barns-Brinton house.
I know. I don't know the research behind. I just know that they found a cage bar in a bar in Tennessee that they felt looked similar to what this looked like, and that's how they reproduced it.
Okay.
But
And then-
I understand what you would think would be over here.
Yeah. My other question, and thank you for what a deep knowledge of the history of food that you have. And I happen to be a food fanatic and a food lover, so I'm a kindred spirit. But when you explain the 12th night cake, it makes me think of today's version of a king cake in New Orleans during Mardi Gras. And again, with the thinking about which way does cultural knowledge flow, was this the predecessor to that cake in New Orleans, or is there some other origin of it? Do you know?
Well, in the recipe books, they call them grape cakes. Some have bride cakes. They're almost similar in their recipe. Like I said, John Mallard, 1807, was the first reference that they found that it actually called a 12th night cake. But like James Townsend says on his site, we don't have cakes that say birthday cake. We just make a cake and we call it the birthday cake. But they did have bride's cakes in those books. So I would think, well, the recipe books that I'm reading were written in England and London and places overseas, not here. So they were brought here. The books that I have are replicas of those books. I would think they originated in Europe and then they came here later. Now, maybe the French brought it to New Orleans. I don't know.
I guess it's just how the name came across. One thing that I know is when they have birthday cakes, I like all my birthday cakes called the king cake. So that's my own personal preference, though.
But the cakes all had the same items in them, just about. It was all the dried fruits, the brandy, and then it's just butter, sugar, eggs, and the flour. There wasn't, and then some had rose water and things like that I didn't get into.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you for that. It sounds like a modern version of or an older version of a fruit cake. Maybe they got tired of baking with the flour and stuff and just made a cake out of fruit. I don't know.
I like that idea.
Okay. Well, that's the end of the questions that I have here, and we're at 6 o'clock, just a little over. So I think that Kathleen will have a word to say.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. We hope you enjoyed tonight's holiday edition of Christmas at the Barns-Brinton House. Special thanks to Randall Spackman, Sandy Johnson, Lynn King, and the Chadds Ford Historical Society, as well as each of you, our viewers, for making our program possible. We look forward to seeing you next month on Thursday, January 21st, live at 5, when we explore the Martin's Tavern in the village of Marshallton. All of us wish you a safe, healthy, and wondrous holiday season. And as Clement Moore once wrote, happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night. Good night.